Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Morning,
Good morning.
members of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I rise to strongly reject, oppose, and denounce the 2021 estimates and expenditure. The budget presentation delivered by the Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, entitled, I quote, "A Path to Recovery, Economic Dynamism and Resilience," apart from being historic for the length of time it took to read, approximately 5 hours, it is also historic because it is the budget with the largest deficit in the history of Guyana, a budget in the excess of $106.651 billion. Mr. Speaker, the Senior Minister has stated that the economy grew a whopping 43.5% in 2020. This, Mr. Speaker, is a testimony to the management of this economy of this country and the policies introduced by the Partnership for National Unity and the Alliance for Change. This economic growth delivered to the people of this country by the Apnu+Afc offers to them the hope and expectation of an equitable economic and social transformation of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, this is the greatest failure of this budget. It fails to offer any genuine prospects of any equitable economic and social transformation of Guyana, which is so needed and desired by the people of Guyana. This failure renders Budget 2021 irrational, insipid, and insensitive. In this sense, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 is ordinary, flat, and unimaginative. It is therefore the classic orthodox budget that the people of this country would come to expect from a People's Progressive Party administration. I would position Budget 2021 by setting at its context Budget 2011. Budget 2011 was a budget of the People's Progressive Party and delivered by the Honorable Ashley Singh. In 2021, this country is again saddled by the People's Progressive Party Civic and the Honorable Ashley Singh. Mr. Speaker, in a column on the 2011 budget, Kaitor News, after reviewing that budget, stated, and I quote, "The 2011 budget is said to be the highest in our country's history. But if you break down the numbers and you add what it will cost the Treasury to increase pensions and social assistance and place this alongside what is being spent on public expenditure, the distinction becomes more clearing and reveals the anti-working class nature of this year's budget." End of quote. It also stated, so where is the benefit for the working class in this budget? The answer, we will be told during the debate, will be in the billions that are going to be spent on education and health. But the rich will also benefit from this, will they not? End of quote. And it stated also, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, "The philosophy of the PPP government is that by helping the rich, we help the poor. The rich create the jobs and keep the industry and commerce going, thus helping the poor." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, this budget, Budget 2021, is a mere continuation of the same trickle-down approach to the economic management of Guyana by the People's Progressive Party Civic. Mr. Speaker, a budget is a monetary reflection of all government policies. It is a document that relates not only to the Minister of Finance, but ultimately to those in government who would implement and prioritize the policies it encapsulates. The agenda laid out in Budget 2021 is quite instructive and revealing of what are the People's Progressive Party's priorities for the next year. When one looks at what were the priorities of the private sector and the Guyana Trade Unions Congress for Budget 2021, and what eventually found its way into Budget 2021, the trickle-down approach is confirmed. The Guyana Trade Unions Congress stated that its priorities were: 1, a reduction in national borrowing. Was it granted? No. A reduction in concessions given to the private sector. Was it granted? No. The erasure of the deficit of the National Insurance Scheme. Was it granted? No. The immediate restoration of the constitutional right to free education at the tertiary level. Was it granted? No. On the other hand, all the requests made by the private sector were granted. Mr. Speaker, the Senior Minister at paragraph 1.15 of Budget 2021 spoke about the budget being one to ensure that the country recovers from the trauma of the last 5 years. You see, Mr. Speaker, when I said that the budget is irrational and insipid, I was not being harsh. For the benefit of the Senior Minister, who we know from the debate to increase the debt ceilings a few weeks ago, engages in imaginary conversations with himself, Let me bring him up to speed with a dose of reality. Whilst he was sojourning for the past 5 years, the economy has grown and flourished. In relation to the productive industries, only the sugar industry contracted in the past 4 years due to the very mismanagement of the sugar industry by the PPPC, a crisis which was inherited by the Partnership for National Unity and Alliance for Change. The other productive industries expanded on an average in the past 5 years. There was notable growth in other crops, gold, other mining and quarrying, petroleum and gas and support services, rice manufacturing, electricity supply, accommodation and food services, financial and insurance activities, professional, scientific and technical services, human health and social work. These expanded on the average in the past 5 years by 5.5%, 12.7%, 14.9%, 119.4%, 6%, 4.2%, 4.5%, 4%, 4.1%, and 4.9% respectively. Further, the respective real gross domestic product for each industry from 2004 to 2019 increased except for the sugar, forestry, and rice industries, which contracted a mere 0.1%, and sugar manufacturing. Noteworthy are the industries which recorded significant growth over the period 2014 to 2019. These include other crops, livestock, gold, other mining and quarrying, petroleum and gas and support services, rice manufacturing, electricity supply, water supply and storage, transport and storage, accommodation and food services, financial and insurance activities, professional, scientific and technical services, administrative and support services, public administration, human health and social work. These increased, Mr. Speaker, by 28.6%, 15.4%, 63.8%, 72.7%, 3,679%, 19.8%, 22.8%, 17.4%, 17.9%, 24.5%, 21.6%, 22.4%, 18.9%, 17.7%, and 26.8% respectively. This could hardly be called a case for recovery from trauma. I know that the phenomenal growth and transformation of the economy would have been traumatic for the senior minister, who had been coming to this parliament for many years with all sorts of brews, devices, and contraptions, but just could not get the economy to perform. You see, Mr. Speaker, the Apnu+Afc believes in empowering economics and people-up economics. Mr. Speaker, the rate of positive growth of the economy that the senior minister and his government is traumatized about was achieved by empowering economics and people-up economics. It was not the PPP trickle-down economics that led to increases in wages and salaries, old age pensions and social assistance. It was not the same old PPP trickle-down economics which resulted in significant growth in the public sector minimum wage. These increases led to higher household income, particularly among those learning within the lowest income brackets, thereby reducing poverty. The public sector minimum wage, Mr. Speaker, increased by over 70% between 2015 and 2019 to reach $70,000. In addition, the expenditure on old age pensions and social assistance increased by 26.4% in 2019 when compared with 2016, reaching $14.8 billion. Between 2015 and 2019, old age pensions increased by 52.6% to meet $20,500. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Finance, Mr. Jordan's prudent and sound management has to be acknowledged, especially now as we stand to lose all the gains the economy made over the last 5 years at the hands of this illegitimate government with a blast from the past with the return of the failed...
Honorable Mr. Forde, you said illegitimate government. Do you have any proof of that?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have proof.
Oh, well.
If you wish me to withdraw it, I will withdraw it for the purposes of your proceedings.
Please.
With a blast from the past, with the return of the failed policies, whereby the rich get richer and the poor stay poorer. Mr. Speaker, let us examine the management of the economy under the last 5 years of the Jagdeo presidency. Let us examine the poor handling of the economy in his first 5 years as elected president and compare that to the performance of the economy under the first 5 years of the Apnu+Afc. You will recall, Mr. Speaker, that the Honorable Member Jagdeo, appointed in 1999, had 2 years to practice as president before he was elected in 2001. Despite having 2 years to practice as president before being elected and having served as finance minister before that, he could not deliver credible economic performance. Then came the flood in 2005, a complete mismanagement of the drainage and irrigation infrastructure. The Honorable Member Jagdio's first 5 years was a complete disaster, in contrast to the Granger administration, which grew the economy 3 times faster than the Jagdio administration ever did. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2001, the economy grew 1.9%. In 2002, it grew 1.1%. In 2003, minus 0.6%. In 2004, 1.6%. In relation to the Granger administration, in 2015, it grew 3.2%. In 2016, 3.3%. In 2017, 2.1%. In 2018, 4.1%. The coalition spending, Mr. Speaker, produced results. It produced results. When the Honorable Member Jagdio inherited the economy from the Jagans, 31% of the GDP was in productive capacity according to the World Bank data. By the time the Granger administration came to power, Guyana productive capacity was below 25%. In other words, Mr. Speaker, the people of Guyana could only use 25% of the GDP to invest instead of 31%. During those very hard times, the Honorable Member Jagdio and the PPP introduced VAT. Now they're pretending that they're protesting against VAT and taxes. Hypocrites, Mr. Speaker, of the highest order. The coalition came to power in 2015 and reduced VAT from Jagdio's 16% to 14% and stabilized the economy. By reducing the rate of VAT, Mr. Speaker, the coalition was able to raise the productive capacity of the country to over 31% again by 2018. This is what the World Bank said. Mr. Speaker, the coalition has increased the opportunity for interested persons to position themselves to take advantage of the opportunities that have emerged from the oil and gas economy. In other words, it was laying the foundation for all Guyanese, not some, as the PPP is now doing. All Guyanese would benefit from the oil and gas economy. Mr. Speaker, the PPP seeks to claim that the coalition did not see agriculture as a priority. Rice output in 2018 was no worse than any time between 2009 and 2014 during the reign of the PPPC. In fact, it was better during that time than any other period. Let us examine the agricultural output of commodities over the last few years. Again and again, Mr. Speaker, it establishes that there was greater economic growth under the coalition. Cassava output was down 67% under the PPPC. It was up 156% under the coalition. Citrus production was down 57% under the PPPC. It was up 193% under the coalition. Banana was down 22%. It was under the PPPC. It was up 144% under the coalition. Even where the PPPC, Mr. Speaker, was able to increase output, the coalition had performed it. Under the coalition, egg production increased 494%. Under the coalition, borer production increased over 600%. Hot pepper cultivation increased nearly 700%. Under the Granger administration, the Granger government, tomato increased 857%. Mr. Speaker, the PPP is about distorting the facts, misleading the people of this country about agriculture and the economy. Pineapple production went up under the coalition by over 1,000%. Plantain production under the coalition increased over 3,000%. In other words, the performance of the economy with respect to pineapples and plantains alone was over 10 times more than under the PPPC. Borer production and citrus production went up over 7 times more than under the PPPC. These agricultural commodities together contribute more than rice and sugar as agricultural crops to our economy. This is what the ordinary man and woman were able to achieve under our government. So the PPPC can talk all it wants because it cannot dispute the fact that the Granger government cared more about the hard-working Guyanese people and their economic future. The PPP cannot discourage the Guyanese people from believing in themselves and from us believing in them. The coalition government has been a government that was sensitive to the concerns and business interests. And it is on the return to government and on its return will continue to be sensitive to the concerns of the people and businesses. In 2015, Mr. Speaker, if you were a worker and earned $50,000 per month, you were able to keep $600,000 a year in your pocket. Because of our government's concern for workers and the importance of families, workers were able to keep all the money they earned, up to $780,000 per year, in their pockets for those 4 years. That is $180,000 extra that the workers were able to keep in their pockets. When you divide that by 4, Mr. Speaker, it means that who earned $780,000 or more got an extra $45,000 in their pockets every year. Under the coalition, it paid to work and we encourage work. In fact, Guyanese workers were able to keep an additional $46 billion in their pocket under our government. Mr. Speaker, the government intends to go borrowing to fund the deficit. But up to now, the senior minister has not told us how much of the budget will be financed by loans. Mr. Speaker, for the 5 years of the Apnu+Afc in government, the total deficit for those years was about $92 billion. Last year, the budget deficit for the PPPC was $92 billion. And this year, over $106 billion. So the program, Mr. Speaker, is to borrow and spend, borrow and spend. Mr. Speaker, the senior minister repeatedly came to the country speaking of the largest budget ever, the largest budget ever. I refer to 2011. In 2012, the senior minister was back at it again with the largest budget ever. On his shortship as a Minister of Finance between 2009 to 2012, Guyana's interest payment to bankers who held our domestic and external debts increased from $30 million to $40 million per year. Mr. Speaker, this represented a decision by the senior minister to transfer wealth and income from the workers of this country. It was only under the Apnu+Afc that workers of this country began to receive any real and genuine benefits from the government. Mr. Speaker, with the increases in the debt ceiling for both external and domestic borrowing, the same approach is being employed again. Mr. Speaker, the heavy debt burden which is being placed on the workers, on the people of this country, will stuff out this fiscal space for benefits to the workers of the country. The PPPC has no concern about the workers. The late President Chedi Jagan, in his 1980 budget presentation, stated, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, I quote, "Debt financing will continue to plague the working people, and this country will sink deeper and deeper into the mire of despondency and despair." But they won't even listen to their own founder leader, Mr. Speaker. The state of despondency and despair which existed under the PPPC is already fermenting and is on its rise. Mr. Speaker, when you listen to the budget speech of the senior minister on sugar, you wonder if he's still jet lagged. Mr. Speaker, it was under the tenure of the senior minister as the then Minister of Finance, that under the People Progressive Party Civic, that sugar suffered its worst and was left to die. The senior minister in 2009 stated that sugar declined by 24.1% in 2005 and 15.8% in 2008 when compared with 2007. Mr. Speaker, after the PPPC allowed the sugar industry to go into free fall, after closing estates, their response was a scaled-down sugar factory. This was supposed to be the silver bullet, but it was to boost the sugar production. But Mr. Speaker, it turned out to be the bane of its existence. The sugar industry was brought, the scaled-down sugar factory was brought to this country by this senior minister. The senior minister entered into loans for scaled-down sugar factory, saddling the workers of this country with over $3,800,000 per year in debt, with a repayment period ending in 2033. They spent billions of dollars to erect a factory that was faulty, poorly designed and constructed. This is the legacy of the senior minister and the PPPC in relation to sugar. But you will notice, Mr. Speaker, that in the budget pages, the 77 pages of this work of fiction, which is this year's budget, the senior minister has not mentioned one word on the scaled-down sugar factory. I know, Mr. Speaker, you have the exercise and you have the prerogative to exercise a fact-checking role on the budget speech. But I know that you cannot contradict me. There's nothing in the budget about the scaled-down sugar factory and the over $200 million wasted by the PPPC on pages 26 to 28. Is this the second phase? Let me quote, is this, quote, the second phase from the 1992 to 2015 period, end of quote, where the senior minister refers to paragraph 1.6 budget of the budget, and I quote, as an era of economic restoration and reconstruction with widespread renewal and expansion, return to our country to insolvency and creditworthiness, and put it firmly on a path of prosperity. That's a joke. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that the senior minister and the PPC have been bad for Guyana. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that the senior minister is orbiting in his own universe. The facts are that between 1998 and 2008, the economy grew under the PPPC by 1%, and in the years 1998, 2000, and 2003, the economy contracted. Mr. Speaker, this budget has abandoned not only the public servants, the teachers, the policemen, and soldiers and nurses, but the employees of the private sector. You see, Mr. Speaker, the PPP's philosophy is that workers must work and preferably be seen and not heard. That is why the voice of workers and labor cannot and did not adorn the pages of this budget. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Labor, the honorable member, cannot be taken seriously. The Minister of Labor, the senior minister, and this government have failed the employees in the private sector. In August 2020, the Minister of Labor announced that he would be reinitiating negotiations for the private sector minimum wages to be increased to $60,000. Mr. Speaker, it was the Apnu+Afc that increased private sector wages in 2017 from $202 to $255, which took the monthly salary from $35,000 to $44,000. Let him laugh, he's a joker. Mr. Speaker, the increases in salary for workers...
Who is him?
Pardon me?
Him.
Who is him?
Who was him?
The honorable member.
Right, and there were about 2 other times when, again, the Minister of Labor, please, either use comrade or honorable, right?
Oh, the honorable member has a joke on him. Mr. Speaker, the increases in salaries for workers, whether private or in public sector, is not a priority for this government. The government simply does not care about the workers. They're totally insensitive. There's no increase in salaries for the soldiers, no increase in salaries for the police, no increase in salaries for the public servants, none for the nurses, none for the teachers. The Minister of Labor has not said a word about this, and we can't expect more from him. He has no point to make. The budget speech is also silent on the National Insurance Scheme. This is not surprising, but it's definitely alarming. The National Insurance Scheme is an important institution for the ordinary Guyanese worker. As I pointed out earlier, the Guyana Trade Unions Congress specifically requested that careful attention be paid to the scheme. The senior minister was the chairman of the Cooperative Finance Administration, which had to approve investments made by the NAS, and did approve the investment of $6 billion in the CLICO company, the Colonial Life Insurance Company. The National Insurance Scheme is now of little importance. It is now of low priority and of little use to the PPCT, Mr. Speaker. You see, while the senior minister was the Minister of Finance and had a responsibility for the National Insurance Scheme, he permitted and allowed the plunder of the scheme. The investment failed, leaving the beneficiaries of NIS suffering terribly. It was the Partnership for National Unity Alliance for Change in September 2016 that signed a debenture agreement of over $5.6 billion to repay the NIS for the losses suffered when the monies were given to CLICO, when it collapsed in 2009 under the senior minister. The further work which would have been undertaken by the Apnu+Afc to fix the scheme has not been considered a priority by the senior minister and by his party. The workers are simply not a priority, but the use of the savings to invest in the Barbies River Bridge Company, where the scheme does not even have a director, was a priority for the PPPC. The senior minister has paid no attention to the National Insurance Scheme. He never had an interest apart from using the money as a gift for associates to invest. Completely overlooked in the budget speech is the need for a comprehensive citizenship, immigration, and border policy. We heard the Labour Minister again wailing about Labour officers learning foreign languages. The same gaffe from last year, nothing of substance. Mr. Speaker, The budget speech has no substance on the issues of constitutional reform and governance. It is clear that there is no commitment to constitutional reform. With respect to the criminal justice system, no meaningful progress has been taken by the People's Progressive Party. Despite the grand talk of an active and rigorous parliamentary agenda, there'll be no progress of sign of any activity or rigor. Under the criminal justice sector reform, guidelines, rules, and programs for the implementation of the restorative justice program had already been developed. Further, the Restorative Justice Bill of 2009 had already been laid in this House. There's not a single piece of legislation which has been identified in the budget speech which would advance or improve the justice sector. All the bills brought to this House, except the unconstitutional Fiscal Management and Accountability Amendment Act, were bills drafted and conceived under the Apnu+Afc. The budget and the Attorney General once again failed to appreciate that there's a need for the establishment of a governance structure that recognizes the reality of our ethnic composition, the devolution of powers to the region, and a review and strengthening of the checks and balances in the constitutional framework. Mr. Speaker, I would not have known last year when I spoke of the PPPC's decision to dissolve the State Assets Recovery Agency and to replace it with a watch poodle, that poodle would have been the Honorable Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General has launched a vicious attack on supporters of the Apnu+Afc seeking to recover lands. Despite this speak of oneness, this is hypocrisy. Since the attention of the Attorney General has been directed to assets of Guyana, and he has a keen interest in the assets of Guyana, I wish to draw his attention to certain facts. On January 12, 2010, NISIL entered into an amendment to an agreement of sale and purchase with National Hardware signed on December 28, 2008 to sell property measuring 103.3 acres for consideration in excess of $598 million. The price per acre sold to National Hardware, $5.8 million, was substantially less than what National Hardware had bid for similar property, approximately 40 acres in 2009 in the same Lilliandale Patterson area, and where the highest bid received in January 2009 was $16.24 million per acre. And that price appeared inadequate to NISIL at the time it was rejected. Also, NISIL received an offer to purchase of approximately $15.1 million per acre for the said land when the property was advertised for expressions of interest in mid-2008. On the 12th of March 2010, vesting order number 4 of 2010 was signed by now the senior minister, vesting the ownership from the government of Guyana via Lands and Surveyors Commission to NISIL. On the 20th of March 2010, that very order was published in the official gazette. On the 16th of March 2010, NISIL wrote Eddie Boyer, informing him that the 103 acres of land which was vested to National Hardware and asking him to pay the balance of $540 million. On June 1, 2010, NISIL wrote Mr. Boyer requesting that the outstanding balance of $540 million due since March 16, 2010 was outstanding and that the interest was accruing until paid. He did pay the balance, Mr. Speaker, between October 29, 2010 and 1st of December 2010. On May 9, 2011, the transport for the property was issued to National Hardware. And this is the kicker now, Mr. Speaker. In 2012, National Hardware sold Edward B. Bihari and Company 16.615 acres out of that 103 acres for $495,085,000. Imagine 16.615 acres of land being sold for 495 odd million. That same 16.6 acres forming part of a 100-acre plot that was sold for 598 million. While officials of and appointed by the Apnu+Afc are being untreated fairly and harassed, the country awaits the investigation of this matter and the institution of legal proceedings. Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to remind this House that the party, our party, my party, during its time in government, governed Guyana differently from the way it was governed 23 years prior to our assumption of office. Everyone is well aware, even though we knew who was on the PPPC's nomination list in 2015 and who were avowed supporters of the PPPC, our government engaged in political neutrality. We did so by refusing to politicize the human resources of this country, unlike what is taking place once again under the PPPC administration. Under the coalition government, Guyanese were able to disclose their party affiliation without fear of dismissal. Guyanese were able to exercise the freedom of speech and association without fear of reprisal during the administration of the coalition. Even as the legitimacy of this government remains under a cloud, we have already seen the vindictiveness and vengeful conduct of the PPPC re-emerge as it has gone about satisfying political patronage.
Honorable Member, we have seen the expiration of your first segment. You need an extension to continue.
Current Speaker, I do move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his whipping.
Honorable Member, I don't know about whipping, but you have 5 minutes to continue to conclude your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, PPP has already returned to the venue addressing the standard version of PPPC inclusion. Our philosophy in governing was different. It was one of tolerance and compromise, in contrast to the spitefulness currently on full display in public. I wish to recall the efforts of my party to align the practice of good governance with the freedoms that the Guyanese expect their government to permit them to have. We believe that the Guyanese people have a right to be free of excessive government domination and control, unjustified imprisonment, and wanton police misconduct. Perhaps Guyanese were surprised by the amount of freedom they were able to enjoy without political reprisal under our administration and a political force and a police force that was becoming better at providing service instead of demanding bribes. Regrettably, in the early days of taking office, we see the return of the ugly head of police brutality and misconduct. What I guess can now be called the signature profile of the PPPC. Further, during our term of office, we sought to leave the people of this country with a greater amount of income that they had earned and they exercised their choice over how to spend it. In doing so, we took the route of reducing the income tax burden on the people of this country. A few in the private sector would have probably felt we had not done enough. In a quite misleading fashion, Budget 2021 can be interpreted to mean state domination and economic degeneration. Our mandate, though, was to rebuild and restore the trust in the institutions of government. Equally important was the task of giving the people a minimum wage. Towards that end, we increased the minimum wage by over 26%, and the salaries of public servants who earn $100,000 and less by an average of 17.1%. That significant salary increase was accompanied by the inclusion of NIS as a tax deduction. Through that process alone, every eligible taxpayer automatically had an increase in their salaries of about 2%. Added to that, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, we increased the threshold to $660,000, bringing further relief to Guyanese and giving them control over their additional income. With putting Guyanese in control of their lives, there was a mission before they increased it to $720,000 in 2017 and reduced the income tax rate from 30 to 28%. Mr. Speaker, all of these steps were taken on a commitment to leave the Guyanese people in control of their destiny and to use their own money as they wish, creatively as they wish. How Guyanese spend their money must always be their choice, even as they join in contributing in the common services of the government. The disposition of my party is unlike that of the PPPCs, whose theme and principle undergirding this 2021 budget continues to veer away from the charge given to us by the Constitution of Guyana that we must complement our economic independence with political sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, this budget wants Guyanese to continue believing that the PPP knows best and must tell them how to live their lives. They must retain for themselves in this budget the right to give and the right to take. By the illegal installation of this government, the coalition did not get a chance to continue the process of reducing the direct tax burden on Guyanese. This budget did not do it either, but our commitment to free the people of this country from excessive dependence on the government is firm and resolute. I therefore want to inform this House and the people of Guyana that it is the intention of our party, along with the coalition partners, to remove income tax from the tax structure of Guyana. Guyana has the capacity to do so, and Guyanese have the right to expect it to happen. This step to free the people from the clutches of the Guyanese government and to give Guyanese control over their income will happen. It will also give them the opportunity to enjoy a quality of life consistent with their work and the possibilities of the country resources as called for in the Constitution. The people of this country will stop paying income tax, and they will not be afraid of political bullying, administrative unfairness, and arrogance as they seek to build wealth and make a positive contribution to our dear land. That is our commitment to Guyana. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 is a colossal failure. The PPPC once again has failed to grapple with the social economic inequalities that exist and which will be exacerbated by the substantial projected growth over this year and other years. They have once again chosen to abandon the people of Guyana, all the people, including the poor people of Guyana. And the Apnu+Afc will forever stand in the defense of the vulnerable, poor, and underprivileged people of Guyana. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.